The Eurosky Airbus A320 was slowly boarding passengers on a sunny morning at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Amid the stream of travelers stood a little girl in a bright yellow dress, as radiant as the sunlight. In her left arm, she clutched a gray stuffed elephant named Momo. With her right hand, she held tightly to her mother's, walking confidently but unhurriedly. "Seats 14A and 14B, Anna Muller whispered, checking their e-ticket. Holding her daughter's hand, she walked toward the middle of the aircraft. Though dressed in a smart business suit and exuding the confidence of a senior marketing executive, Anna couldn't help but notice a few glances cast their way, not all of them friendly. "Mama, can I sit by the window? I want to see the clouds float like whipped cream," asked 7-year-old Sophie Muller, looking up with sparkling blue eyes. "Of course, my sunshine princess," Anna smiled, helping her daughter settle into her seat. Anna was about to take out her tablet to review the final version of her presentation for a crucial meeting at the Zurich headquarters, a rare promotion opportunity. But before she could power it on, a flight attendant approached. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly straightened, her makeup meticulous, yet her eyes were colder than the smile on her lips. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Clara. We need to make a small adjustment to your seating arrangement." Anna looked up, wary. "Is there a problem? We have a family with a young child who needs to sit near the lavatory for medical reasons. They're currently seated in business class, and we were hoping you could move to row 27. Anna turned around. Row 27 was right beside the lavatory, across from 2 kids yelling and kicking the seat in front. It was less private, less comfortable, and most importantly, far from her daughter. "I specifically chose these seats so I could sit next to my child. I'm sorry, but we'll be staying here." Clara pressed her lips together, maintaining a polite expression, though her gaze hardened. Behind her stood a family of 3. A tall, salt-and-pepper-haired man in a suit, a blonde woman in a designer dress, and a bored-looking boy in a private school uniform. "I'm Dr. Richard Weiss." The man spoke in a warm yet authoritative tone. "My son has a chronic intestinal condition. We need to sit near the lavatory." Anna nodded calmly. "I understand, but perhaps it would be easier to ask a solo traveler without a young child." "I can't be separated from my daughter," Clara interjected. "We've asked several passengers, but they declined." "Mama," Sophie tugged at Anna's sleeve and spoke quietly, yet loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Is this like when they gave us the table by the kitchen at the restaurant even though we had a reservation?" A hush fell over the surrounding rows. Richard Weiss paused. His wife looked down, avoiding Anna's eyes. At that moment, an older flight attendant stepped in. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, and her name tag read Margaret. "What seems to be the issue here?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding. Clara quickly explained the situation in her own terms. Margaret glanced at Anna, then at Sophie. Upon hearing the name Sophie Muller, she suddenly froze. "Muller?" she asked, brows furrowing. "Are you related to Colonel Wilhelm Muller, Squadron 92, Luftwaffe fighter pilot during World War II?" Anna hesitated. "Yes, he was my grandfather, but I don't talk about it much, for understandable reasons." Both Clara and Richard Weiss looked at Margaret, confused. But her expression had completely changed, from stern to emotional. Her voice trembled. "Wilhelm Muller saved my father's life when his plane was about to be shot down over Austrian airspace in 1945. He defied orders and turned his squadron back to escort my father's damaged aircraft safely to base." Margaret turned to Clara. "This passenger and her daughter will keep their seats. Find alternative arrangements for the other family." Richard opened his mouth to object, but Margaret cut him off. "Not everyone has a name to be proud of, Dr. Weiss. But when someone does, it deserves respect." Clara swallowed hard. I'm sorry. May I offer you and your daughter something to drink before takeoff?" Anna nodded, though her eyes were far colder than her response. After Clara walked away, Sophie tugged at her mother's sleeve again. Why did she change her mind when she heard great-grandpa's name? Anna gently stroked her daughter's hair, choosing her words carefully. Because some names carry stories bigger than us, and those who know them can never forget. The plane lifted gently off the Paris runway, leaving behind wisps of cloud as thin as pale gray silk. By the window, Sophie gazed out at the sky, her nose almost pressed against the glass. Anna leaned back in her seat. She had reviewed every chart, slide, and communications plan for the upcoming meeting in Zurich. Everything was ready, and though she ought to have taken a few moments to rest, her mind lingered on an unanswered question. Why had an old name like Wilhelm Müller moved that flight attendant so deeply? The sound of footsteps made her turn. Margaret, the older flight attendant, was approaching with a tray holding 2 tiny cups of hot chocolate, topped with marshmallows like snowflakes. "A small thank you from the crew," Margaret said softly, placing the tray on the folding table. Then she bent down slightly, her voice rough with emotion. "If you have a moment, I'd love to speak with you in private, if that's all right." Anna nodded. She let Sophie enjoy the treat, then followed Margaret to the rear of the cabin, near the crew's galley. There were no other passengers nearby. The attendant gently removed her name tag and set it aside, as if shedding her official role. "My name is Margaret Lehman. My father was Major George Lehman, a B-24 bomber pilot for the Allies. In 1945, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire while flying over Salzburg. A German squadron appeared. They could have easily finished him off, but one pilot, Wilhelm Müller, signaled for him and his crew to escape, even escorting them out of danger. After the war, my father always said a German pilot saved his life." Anna swallowed hard, her chest tightening as she listened. Back then, no one believed it. A Luftwaffe pilot? Saving Allied soldiers? Impossible. But my father remembered the name, and the way that man looked through the cockpit window, calm, without regret. "My grandfather never spoke about the war," Anna said quietly. "He kept it all inside. We knew he had been a pilot, but nothing more." Margaret nodded. "Men like him don't seek praise. But I want you to know, he left behind a mark that cannot be erased." And today, when I heard that name from a little girl in a yellow dress, it felt like my heart was pulled back to 1945. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. In it stood a man in a German pilot's uniform, beside a propeller plane. Though the image was blurry, Anna recognized him instantly. The high bridge of his nose, the stern yet not unkind eyes, Wilhelm, younger than she'd ever seen him. "I think you should keep this," Margaret whispered. "So your daughter knows that sometimes kindness reaches across even the deepest battle lines." Anna accepted the photo with both hands, a sting rising in her nose, not from distant memories, but from the feeling that she and her daughter were now part of a story far bigger than they had ever imagined. Back in her seat, Sophie looked up. "What were you talking about, Mama?" Anna hesitated, then sat down beside her. "I just heard a story I'd never been told, about your great-grandfather, about courage that never asked for recognition." Sophie thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. She pulled Momo the elephant closer. "Like a superhero who doesn't wear a cape?" Anna smiled, strangely accurate. From across the aisle, an elderly woman with neatly curled silver hair and eyes as deep as a mountain lake turned and smiled at Sophie. "You're Sophie Müller, aren't you? I'm Dr. Eva Richter. Did you know your great-grandfather was once interviewed by me for a historical study?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Really?" Anna looked surprised. Eva continued, "I wrote my doctoral thesis on German pilots who disobeyed orders to save the enemy. Very rare, only a handful. Wilhelm Müller was one of them. Few knew much about him, he didn't talk. But his story lived on, in letters, journals, and memories like that flight attendant's." Eva reached into her bag and pulled out a small book. "This is Beyond Orders, Acts of Mercy in War. Your grandfather is mentioned in Chapter 3. Sophie took the book and looked at her mother. "Can we read it tonight, Mama?" "Absolutely." The plane soared over the Alps, its wings cutting above snow-covered peaks. At thousands of meters above ground, history stirred. Not through grand speeches, but through a little girl in a yellow dress, an old photograph, and memories that refused to sleep. At Zurich Airport, As passengers began to rise after the plane had landed, Anna held her daughter's hand tightly. "We're about to meet your great-grandfather," she whispered. "Are you nervous?" Sophie nodded, then suddenly asked, "Do you think he still remembers the sky?" The question made Anna pause. She wasn't sure. Wilhelm's health had been declining rapidly. Part of why she brought Sophie this time instead of waiting for a better moment. Their taxi wove through the clean, orderly streets of the city. Pointed roof houses and ivy-covered walls passed by outside the window. Wilhelm's small house sat on a low hill in the suburbs. Simple, but full of character, just like the man himself. The wooden door opened before they even knocked. Ms. Mahler, a middle-aged woman in a nursing uniform, greeted them. "Yes, I'm Anna, and this is my daughter, Sophie. He's waiting for you in the reading room. He said today is a special day." Anna nodded and led Sophie down the familiar hallway. Black and white photos lined the walls, mostly planes, pilots, a few weathered certificates from the Luftwaffe. They weren't displayed like trophies, but more like a quiet stream of memory. The reading room was bathed in late afternoon light. Wilhelm Muller, now over 95 years old, sat leaning back in a worn leather chair, a wool blanket over his lap. His eyes were half closed, but at the sound of footsteps, he opened them. Though age had taken its toll, his gaze was unchanged, direct, calm, like the sky after a storm. "Anna," he said, his voice rough but clear. "And this must be." "I'm Sophie," the girl said shyly, then with more confidence. "I wore a yellow dress because Mama said I'm her sunshine." A quiet smile spread across Wilhelm's face. "Yellow was your great-grandmother's favorite color," he said, eyes glistening. "She wore a yellow dress on our wedding day, not white." Anna sat in the chair opposite him, observing her grandfather carefully. It had been nearly 10 years since her last visit. They had kept in touch, letters, phone calls, but the distance between them wasn't just geographical. There were things left unsaid, because both had guarded their own memories too closely. "We met someone on the plane," Anna began. "A flight attendant, whose father was a bomber pilot. You saved him. She remembers you. And there's a historian. She wrote about you, too." Wilhelm didn't respond right away. He turned to Sophie. "You know, in war, many things are a blur. Up in the sky, everything happens fast. Life and death decisions sometimes come down to a single flick of the stick. But in those fleeting moments, you often see most clearly who you really are." Sophie nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the gravity in his words. Anna took a deep breath. "Grandpa, there's something I need to ask. Why did you never tell the family about what you did? About disobeying orders? Saving lives? The letter from that pilot's son? All of it was hidden away." Wilhelm was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Do you know what's hardest for a soldier who survives?" "What?" "It's the eyes of those you couldn't save." The room fell completely still. "I didn't keep quiet out of shame, but because every time I remembered what I did right, I also remembered what I couldn't do. The planes that never came back. The friends who didn't make it." He placed a hand over his chest, where his heartbeat pulsed faintly. "But maybe I was wrong to keep it all to myself." Sophie pulled out the book Eva Richter had given her, Beyond Orders. She placed it on the table and said, "I want to know your story, not just from a book. From you." For the first time, Anna saw a tear slide down her grandfather's cheek. "Then I will tell it," he said. "But you must promise not to stay silent like I did." Sophie nodded. Her eyes sparkled. Her yellow dress seemed to glow in the fading light. An echo of memory, a vow made, and the beginning of a new generation ready to continue where the last had once stopped. Sophie scooted closer to her great-grandfather, placing a small hand on his thin knee, a quiet gesture of comfort. Wilhelm gently brushed her hair with a trembling hand, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the oak trees outside were blazing in the colors of autumn. "Do you know why I was never called a hero?" he began, his voice wavering. "Not from weakness, but from something harder to name." Sophie shook her head. Anna held her breath, not interrupting. Because heroes are the ones people talk about in stories, he continued. And I was forgotten so history could be a little less uncomfortable. The room felt frozen in time. Afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating tiny dust motes suspended in the air, like memories that hadn't quite settled. Anna spoke softly. But what if we tell the story now? Is it too late? Wilhelm turned to her. In his clouded eyes, Anna saw a flicker of surprise. Then he nodded. It's never too late when someone is willing to listen. He motioned toward the old wooden cabinet beside the bookshelf. Anna rose and opened it. Inside, small drawers were arranged neatly. In the bottom drawer lay a mahogany box, its brass latch dulled with age. When she opened it, a faint scent of paper and aged wood drifted out, as if time itself had been sealed inside. Letters. Dozens of envelopes, sorted by date, many yellowed with age. Different handwriting, most in English, a few in French, and even some in German from old fellow pilots. Anna picked up one envelope and read aloud. To Lieutenant Wilhelm Meller, from Mrs. Frances Atwood, Indiana, USA. 1947. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Dear Mr. Meller, my husband, James Atwood, was once the captain of AB-17. He used to speak of a German pilot who escorted his crippled plane to safety. After the war, he said, if an enemy saves your life, then maybe they were never truly your enemy. Anna didn't finish reading. She sat down, her throat tightening. Sophie watched closely, wide-eyed. Can I keep one of the letters? The girl asked softly. Wilhelm looked at her and nodded. You can keep them all if you want, as long as you do something with them. Anna looked at her daughter, then at her grandfather. There's a school in Zurich that just launched a living history program. Students tell the stories of their own families. Sophie could. I could make an exhibit, Sophie said, her voice bright with excitement. About people like you. Not heroes in newspapers, but real people who did the right thing. Wilhelm chuckled quietly. A silent no more exhibit, he whispered. I like that idea. The light in the room had turned a rich amber. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, as if whispering its approval. Anna felt a decision begin to take root inside her, not yet fully formed but clear in spirit. It was time to stop merely visiting her family's history. It was time to live with it, protect it, and let the next generation carry it forward. Wilhelm exhaled and closed his eyes for a moment. If you truly do this, Sophie, he said slowly, remember, compassion doesn't need recognition to matter, but when it's shared, it can change others. Sophie smiled. I'll tell the story, and I'll wear my yellow dress. 3 days after the conversation in the reading room, Wilhelm's small house was livelier than usual. On the oak dining table, Anna and Sophie were carefully placing old letters into clear plastic sleeves, numbering and sorting them by year and country of origin. Mama, this one has a London postmark. The writer's a nurse, Sophie said, holding up an envelope with a faint ink smudge. Anna leaned in, skimming the contents. I once cared for a wounded Canadian officer. He said a German pilot risked his life to guide their aircraft through enemy fire. They never learned his name, only called him Red 14. I believe that was your father. Red 14, Anna repeated softly. A call sign in place of a name, a symbol drifting through hostile skies, where humanity still found a way to fly. Wilhelm sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket, quietly watching them with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Every now and then, Sophie would rush over to show him a new letter, and he would nod, thoughtful. Though his health no longer allowed long conversations, his presence, like that of a living monument, gave every action in the house a weight it hadn't had before. That evening, Anna took Sophie for a walk through the small garden behind the house, where apple trees hung heavy with late-season fruit. The leaves had begun to turn gold, and the breeze carried the scent of damp earth. Nature, too, seemed to be preparing for a new chapter. Mama, do you miss home? Sophie asked tentatively. You mean the apartment in Munich? And your job, too. Are you going back? Anna didn't answer right away. She bent down to pick up a red leaf from the path. Before we came here, I thought my job was the most important thing I had. But now I'm not so sure. Being here, it feels like I'm doing something right. Not just for Grandpa, but for you. Because I like learning about history? Sophie tilted her head. Anna let out a soft laugh. Because you need to know where you come from to understand where you're going. And so do I. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand, then added, as if an idea had just struck her. We could do a little exhibit at the new school. Invite people from the neighborhood. Invite Dr. Eva Richter. Maybe even Margaret, the flight attendant. If you can find her email. Anna looked at her daughter and saw something new in her eyes. Initiative, confidence. Something that hadn't shown itself so clearly before. Not just a child inspired, but someone beginning to make her own mark. She nodded gently. Then maybe I need to find a new job. Something closer to Grandpa, closer to you. Maybe not as prestigious as the old one, but more meaningful. The next morning, in the now familiar reading room, Anna made a phone call to her manager in Munich. Her voice was calm and firm. I truly appreciate the promotion opportunity, but I won't be returning to the office next month. I need time for my family and for a personal project that matters. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her manager sounded surprised, but kind. I take it something's changed? Not changed, Anna said. I've just started to understand what deserves to come first. When she hung up, she turned to Wilhelm, who had silently listened to the entire call. He said nothing at first, just smiled. Then, with a voice frail but still clear, "Good. Don't let a business card decide your worth." Just then, Sophie burst into the room, clutching her notebook. "Great-grandpa, I want to interview you, like a real journalist. I'll write everything down for the exhibit." Wilhelm chuckled, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't just polite laughter. It was joy. "If you bring some of your mama's apple cake," he said, "I'll answer anything you want." The multipurpose hall of Kant Middle School, on the outskirts of Zurich, had never hosted an exhibition quite like this. There were no modern paintings or tech science models, just light wooden display boards, covered in old letters, black and white photos, and handwritten notes. Most of them penned by a 7-year-old girl. At the center of the exhibition stood a large board with a simple title. Red 14, a pilot without medals, but who saved a generation. Curated by Sophie Muller, with guidance from her family and Dr. Eva Richter. That afternoon, time seemed to slow. The first guests arrived, parents, teachers, a few neighbors. They began reading the letters. One from an Irish-American mother written in 1946, one from a French soldier who had once met Wilhelm Mahler in a POW camp, another from a child who had been given candy by him during the Cold War. No one spoke during the first few minutes. There was only the soft rustle of paper, slow footsteps, and the occasional quiet sigh of emotion. In one corner of the room, Wilhelm sat in a wheelchair, pushed by Anna, with Sophie by his side, once again wearing the now iconic yellow dress. On the table in front of him lay a copy of the first letter he had ever received from a stranger after the war. A thank you note, scribbled, full of spelling mistakes, but utterly sincere. Eva Richter stepped onto the small temporary stage and opened the ceremony with a voice calm, yet filled with emotion. Not all history lives in textbooks. Some live in drawers, in unspoken memories, and in the hearts of those who know that doing the right thing doesn't require a spotlight. She paused, turning toward Sophie. We are here today not to honor a hero, but to finally hear a voice we forgot to listen to. And the one who gave that voice back is a 7-year-old girl who decided that silence should not last another generation. Sophie stepped up to the podium, holding the microphone with both hands. She glanced around, a bit nervous, then took a deep breath and began. My name is Sophie Muller. My great-grandpa is Wilhelm Muller. He used to be a pilot in the war. He didn't like talking about the past, but I think, if I didn't tell his story, no one would ever know it. The room fell into an even deeper silence. I learned that some people stay quiet because they carry too much sadness, but no one should be forgotten just because they didn't speak for themselves. Today, we're telling his story to remember, to understand, and to learn how to be human. Applause followed, not loud at first, but rising gradually like a gentle wave, spreading through the room. And in Wilhelm's eyes, a light flickered, not pride, but relief. His story had finally been heard, and it was no longer a burden he had to carry alone. As the exhibition closed, many lingered. An elderly woman, her hands trembling, placed a palm on a letter her son had once written to Wilhelm, a letter never sent. A history teacher suggested turning the exhibit into a traveling program for other schools. And a young boy quietly approached Sophie and handed her a paper medal he'd made in art class. "I made this. If your great-grandpa didn't get a medal, I think he should have one." Sophie took it, beaming. In a quiet corner near the exit, Anna sat beside Wilhelm. He placed his hand lightly on hers, so lightly it barely touched. "You did what I never dared," he said. "Not because I lacked courage, but because I ran out of time." "No, Grandpa," Anna replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We still have time. We just can't let it slip by again." Wilhelm nodded. A breeze of early autumn slipped through the window, and Anna knew, in that wind, there wasn't just the scent of a new season, but the peaceful closing of an old chapter, so the next one could begin. 10 months later, Zurich, spring. The riverbanks along the Limmat were blooming with golden daffodils, white plum blossoms, and pale lavender. Sunlight poured over red-tiled roofs, danced across the water, and wove through the cobbled streets. In the garden behind Wilhelm's house, Sophie carefully patted soil around a new flower bed. "What are you planting?" Eva Richter asked, stepping in through the back gate. "Sunflowers," Sophie answered, determined. "I heard they always turn toward the light." Eva smiled, looking at the girl in a lemon-yellow cotton dress, her hair in braids, hands dirty, but eyes shining like early summer sun. "Fitting," Eva said. "Both the flower and the meaning." Anna emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. After the exhibition, she had officially taken a job at a local museum. Less glamorous than the advertising world she once knew, but with a quiet fulfillment she couldn't quite explain. Wilhelm's home had become a true home for her and Sophie, and a place where a legacy had begun to breathe again. They sat together on the wooden bench by the grapevine fence, watching Sophie label each tiny pot with messy handwriting. Hope, courage, compassion. Eva turned to Anna. "She's creating a new kind of language, not with words, but with actions." Anna nodded. "I think legacy isn't what's been told and finished. It's what keeps others beginning." They sat in silence for a while. A soft spring breeze rustled the old oak leaves, like applause for something just spoken. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, Anna sat by the window in what was once Wilhelm's reading room, now her home office. She was organizing the first batch of digitized materials for a long-term project. The Red 14 Archive, an open-access collection of letters, photos, and stories of wartime compassion. From all sides, a new email appeared. The subject line, "We met on Flight 2171, from Clara Margaret Lehman. Anna opened it. Clara wrote about how she had requested a transfer to the Flight Attendant Training Division, where she hoped to teach lessons about bias, memory, and about Sophie. She attached a photo, a collage of sticky notes from trainees, all arranged around a sketch of a yellow dress, the small symbol of a young passenger who had changed her perspective. Anna closed her eyes. In her mind, she could almost hear Wilhelm's voice whisper again. Compassion doesn't need recognition to matter, but if shared, it can change others. 10 years later, an open ending. At a modern gallery in Berlin, a slow-moving crowd passed through photos, 3D displays, and archival documents. The exhibition title read, "Beyond Borders, Acts of Mercy in Wartime," curated by Sophie Muller. A little girl with curly hair tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing to the centerpiece. A photo of a man in an old flight suit, standing beside a propeller plane, not holding a weapon, but extending a hand, as if urging someone else to go ahead of him. "Mama, who's that?" "A man who stayed silent for a very long time," the mother replied. until a little girl in a yellow dress decided to listen.